The Wrath commander stood before his assembled officers, pride gleaming in his eyes. His voice dripped with arrogance as he addressed them. Today, we've struck a blow that will bring the humans to their knees. We have their children. The room was filled with murmurs of approval, their harsh alien voices echoing in agreement. To them, this was a simple, brutal victory. Human children were fragile, soft, a perfect bargaining chip to make humanity surrender without a fight. The Wrath had done this before with countless species, but they had never faced humanity's youngest. In the corner, the elder alien diplomat observed in silence, his expression hardening. He was old, far older than most of the soldiers in the room, and his wisdom had been earned through countless conflicts. While the others celebrated, he knew better. He had seen what humans were capable of. He had witnessed the devastation they could unleash, and he had heard the stories about how they responded when their loved ones were threatened, especially their children. The elder approached the commander, his voice low but firm. You are making a grave mistake. The commander chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound. You worry too much, old one. They are children. What can they do? The elder's eyes narrowed. That is precisely the problem. You've captured their children. Humans, they're not like the others we've conquered. They will stop at nothing to get them back. And their children, they are not the helpless beings you think they are. The commander waved him off with a dismissive hand. Humans are soft. They don't have the stomach for real warfare, not when it threatens their young. They will bend. They will beg. You misunderstand, the elder said, stepping closer. Humans don't bend. Not when it comes to their children. They are resilient, unpredictable, and resourceful. You are not dealing with mere captives. You are dealing with a species that teaches its children to survive, to fight, even when all seems lost. The commander's confidence remained unshaken, his eyes gleaming with amusement. They are just children. They are human children, the elder warned. And that makes all the difference. The elder's words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The commander turned back to his officers, dismissing the diplomat's concerns as nothing more than paranoia. The room was filled with the sound of Wrath soldiers strategizing their next steps, already discussing how they would use the children to blackmail humanity into submission. Meanwhile, aboard the Wrath warship where the human children were held, things were far from quiet. The oldest of the group, a boy of 14, crouched in the shadows, his eyes scanning their surroundings. He was scared, but he wasn't paralyzed by fear. Instead, his mind raced with thoughts of how to get out, how to protect the younger ones. They had been taught to survive. They had learned from their parents, from their teachers, from Earth itself. And now, everything they knew would be tested. The other children huddled around him, their faces pale but determined. One of the younger girls, no older than 10, looked up at him. What are we going to do? We're getting out of here, the boy whispered, his voice steady. We just need to stay calm, think, and find a way to use this ship against them. It wasn't the first time they had faced danger. Earth wasn't exactly a peaceful place, and even at their young age, they had been taught how to survive in difficult situations. The boy began outlining a plan, assigning tasks to each child based on their strengths. Some would scout the ship, looking for weaknesses. Others would gather supplies. And a few would stay behind to keep an eye on their captors. The children moved quickly and quietly, their small forms slipping through the corridors of the ship unnoticed by the Wrath guards. To the aliens, the children were little more than helpless cargo. They hadn't even bothered to keep a close watch on them, believing that fear alone would keep them in line. But fear wasn't stopping them. It was driving them. As they explored, the children discovered the ship's systems were vulnerable in ways the Wrath hadn't anticipated. The boy realized they could exploit the technology, manipulate the controls, disrupt the systems, and cause enough chaos to buy them time. They didn't need brute strength. They just needed to be smart, and they were. The first signs of sabotage were small. A door malfunctioned, refusing to open for a Wrath guard. Another guard reported a power fluctuation in one of the ship's secondary systems. The commander dismissed these as technical glitches, insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But the elder knew better. He watched the reports with growing unease. The signs were subtle, but he could see the pattern emerging. The humans were already fighting back. It wouldn't be long before the real trouble started. Back on Earth, the Terran Confederation received word of the children's capture. The message was met with grim determination, not panic. There would be no negotiations. Humanity didn't negotiate with those who threatened their children. Instead, an elite team was assembled, battle-hardened soldiers trained for the most dangerous of missions. Their objective was clear: retrieve the children, no matter the cost. As the rescue team prepared for launch, the children on the Wrath ship continued their silent rebellion. Every system they tampered with added to the chaos. Lights flickered, doors jammed, and communication lines went down. The Wrath were growing frustrated, their once impenetrable warship now plagued by inexplicable malfunctions. The commander, still unaware of the full extent of the sabotage, ordered a sweep of the ship. He was determined to restore order and remind the crew of their superiority over the weak, human captives. But the elder alien, watching from the shadows, knew it was too late. The humans, even their children, were not weak. They never had been. The first signs of real chaos began to emerge as the children's sabotage efforts spread through the ship. Systems that were once functioning smoothly now faltered at critical moments, leaving the Wrath crew frustrated and confused. The commander's irritation grew by the hour as his subordinates reported malfunction after malfunction. Lights flickered erratically, navigation systems glitched, and communication channels went silent for extended periods. No one could figure out why the ship was suddenly malfunctioning. The children had hidden themselves deep within the ship's ventilation system. From there, they moved through the ship undetected, sabotaging whatever they could reach. The older children led the charge, their quick thinking and creative tactics leaving the Wrath in disarray. They knew they couldn't fight the aliens directly, but they could disrupt everything, and it was working. The ship's once orderly environment had become a maze of unpredictable failures and malfunctions. One of the youngest children, a 10-year-old girl, crouched beside the oldest boy as they watched a group of Wrath soldiers struggle to get a door open. The girl smiled, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "They don't even know we're here." The boy nodded, his focus on the task ahead. "We need to keep them guessing. If we can make them believe the ship is falling apart, we'll have more time." Time was something they desperately needed. They knew the Terran Confederation would send help, but they didn't know how long it would take for their rescue to arrive. Until then, they had to keep the Wrath busy, keep them off balance, and most importantly, keep themselves hidden. Meanwhile, the Wrath commander paced in frustration. His ship, a massive war vessel known for its reliability and strength, was behaving like a broken toy. The commander barked orders, demanding answers, but none of his subordinates could provide an explanation for the malfunctions. His patience was wearing thin. "These humans," he muttered under his breath, glaring at the flickering screens in front of him. "They must have done something. There's no other explanation." The elder alien diplomat, who had remained quietly observing from the sidelines, stepped forward once again. "I warned you," he said, his tone calm but firm. "This is what happens when you underestimate humans." The commander scowled, his eyes narrowing at the elder. "You think this is the work of the children?" The elder nodded. "They're not like the other species we've captured. Human children are resourceful, and they've likely been taught how to survive in situations far worse than this. You've made a mistake, and now your ship is paying the price." The commander clenched his fists, refusing to believe that mere children could cause such havoc. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. The elder's warning, though irritating, was starting to make sense. The malfunctions were too coordinated, too targeted. Something more was going on than simple technical errors. As the chaos on the ship continued to spread, the Wrath soldiers grew increasingly paranoid. They began searching the ship frantically, looking for any sign of the human children. But the children were always one step ahead. They used the ship's layout to their advantage, slipping through vents, hiding in maintenance shafts, and always staying just out of sight. Every time a soldier thought they had found one of the children, it was too late. The child would vanish into the shadows, leaving behind only more confusion and frustration. Back on Earth, the Terran Confederation had mobilized their elite rescue team. These were the best of the best, soldiers trained in infiltration, extraction, and combat under the most extreme conditions. They had been briefed on the situation and knew exactly what was at stake. The Wrath had made a grave mistake by capturing human children, and humanity would stop at nothing to get them back. The team's commander, a seasoned veteran with years of experience in alien conflicts, addressed his unit before they launched. "We're not just rescuing prisoners," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "We're bringing our children home. The Wrath think they can use them as leverage, but they've underestimated what it means to threaten our young. This isn't just a mission, it's a message. We don't negotiate when it comes to our own." The team boarded their stealth ship, preparing for the long journey to intercept the Wrath warship. Their plan was simple: infiltrate, retrieve the children, and destroy any Wrath resistance that stood in their way. They knew the risks, but they were ready. Failure wasn't an option. Back on the Wrath ship, the children were beginning to gain the upper hand. Their sabotage had reached a critical point. Power was flickering throughout the ship, and key systems were failing. The Wrath crew had become divided, with some believing that the ship itself was malfunctioning, while others suspected foul play. The commander, now fully convinced that the children were responsible, ordered a full lockdown of the ship. But it was too late. The children had already taken control of key systems, and the Wrath were losing control. The commander, for the first time, felt a twinge of fear. His ship, his command, was slipping away from him, all because of a group of human children. The elder's warning echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of his miscalculation. "They're children," the commander muttered to himself, pacing back and forth. "How can this be happening?" The elder, standing in the shadows, watched silently. He had tried to warn them, but they hadn't listened. Now, the Wrath would pay the price for their arrogance. The turning point came when the children realized they could do more than just disrupt the Wrath's systems. They could take control. Hidden deep within the bowels of the warship, they found a way to access the ship's secondary command center, a small auxiliary bridge used for emergencies. It wasn't as sophisticated as the main control room, but it gave them a direct line to many critical systems, including navigation and internal communications. The oldest boy, now unofficially leading the group, stood before the control panel, his fingers hovering over the alien symbols. His heart raced, but he knew they had no choice but to act. He glanced at the others, their faces dirty but determined, waiting for his cue. The moment was tense, but they'd made it this far. They couldn't turn back now. "We're doing this," he whispered. "No more hiding." With a deep breath, he activated the console. At first, the screen flickered with unfamiliar alien scripts, but the children had learned enough from their sabotage efforts to understand the basics. Within moments, they had access to the ship's internal systems. They could see everything: the locations of the Wrath soldiers, the condition of the ship, and more importantly, they could control key systems remotely. The Wrath had no idea what was happening. Alarms blared throughout the ship as life support systems fluctuated, airlocks mysteriously opened and closed, and the ship's artificial gravity suddenly deactivated, sending crew members floating helplessly through the corridors. Panic spread quickly among the Wrath, who struggled to regain control, but the ship had turned against them, now under the command of their young human prisoners. As the children coordinated their efforts, they communicated through short, whispered commands. They had learned to work together, trusting each other with tasks they were best suited for. The youngest children, though scared, followed orders with remarkable focus, cutting power to sections of the ship where Wrath patrols were thickest, leaving the aliens disoriented and isolated. The older ones manipulated the ship's defenses, sealing off access points and trapping the Wrath in different compartments. Meanwhile, the Wrath commander was losing control of his crew. His soldiers, once disciplined and fearless, were now scattered and frightened. They couldn't figure out why their systems were failing or how the humans had managed to outmaneuver them at every turn. The commander's frustration turned to desperation, and he began barking contradictory orders, trying to regain authority in the face of chaos. "Find them!" he snarled at his subordinates, though he had no real plan. "They're just children!" But deep down, the commander knew he had lost control. His arrogance had led him here. The elders' warnings haunted him, but he refused to accept the reality that a group of children had outsmarted him. Elsewhere on the ship, the children realized that their sabotage had given them a window of opportunity. They weren't just trying to survive anymore, they had a real chance to escape. The older girl, who had been monitoring the ship's external communications, suddenly spoke up. "They're sending a signal to someone," she said, her voice tense. "It looks like a distress call." The boy leading the group frowned. "To who?" She pointed at the screen. "Looks like another Wrath fleet. They're calling for reinforcements." His mind raced. If reinforcements arrived, they'd be trapped, no matter how well they'd sabotaged the ship. They needed to act fast. "We have to stop that transmission," he said, leaning over her shoulder to examine the controls. But before he could figure out how, something else caught his eye, a signal on a different frequency, faint but familiar. His heart skipped a beat. "It's them," he whispered, almost to himself. "The rescue team. They're close." The children exchanged glances, hope flickering in their eyes for the first time in what felt like forever. Reinforcements were coming, but this time, they were human. Suddenly, the mission changed. The children weren't just escaping, they had to ensure the ship was in their control by the time the rescue team arrived. They needed to send a message, a signal to let the humans know they were alive and ready to be rescued. But more than that, they wanted to make sure the Wrath would never forget what had happened here. The girl quickly adjusted the communications system, rerouting the signal through the auxiliary bridge. Within moments, she had cut the Wrath distress call and replaced it with a message of her own. "This is the Terran Confederation's missing prisoners," she said, her voice steady but fierce. "The ship is ours." The boy nodded approvingly. They weren't just helpless prisoners anymore. They were in control. The Wrath would learn that humans, especially their children, were not to be underestimated. Meanwhile, the Wrath commander stood in stunned silence, staring at the reports flooding in from his crew. His warship had been taken over from the inside, and now the children were openly defying him. His mind raced, trying to comprehend the magnitude of his failure. The elder's words echoed once more in his thoughts, but now they carried a heavier weight, laden with regret. "You captured human children? You are insane!" It was too late to turn back. The commander's pride had been his downfall, and now his ship, his entire command, was slipping away. As the children continued to disable critical systems, they prepared for the final stage of their plan. The boy, standing at the console, issued his final order to the group. "We take them to the fleet." With newfound determination, they adjusted the ship's course, locking it onto a trajectory that would take them straight into the heart of the Terran Confederation's rescue force. The Wrath, powerless to stop them, could only watch as their mighty warship was hijacked by a group of young humans. The children knew they were close to freedom, but they wouldn't be content with just escaping. They wanted the Wrath to understand exactly what had happened, that they had been outwitted, outmaneuvered, and ultimately defeated by the very prisoners they had thought would be their leverage. It was a message that would reverberate across the galaxy. As the Wrath ship hurtled toward its inevitable encounter with the Terran fleet, the children remained vigilant. They had proven that they were more than just captives. They were a force to be reckoned with, and they wouldn't stop until they were home. As the Wrath ship barreled toward the awaiting Terran fleet, the children prepared for the final step of their daring operation. They knew that the Wrath forces on board had been reduced to disarray, but there were still pockets of resistance. The remaining crew, though few, were becoming increasingly desperate. The children couldn't afford any mistakes now. They were so close to their freedom, and the arrival of the rescue fleet was imminent. The boy in charge of navigation checked the ship's coordinates once more, ensuring their course was locked. The Wrath warship would soon be intercepted by the Terran fleet, and by then, it needed to be clear who was in control. His voice, calm yet commanding, cut through the tense atmosphere among the children. "We're almost there. Everyone stay sharp," he said, knowing full well the enormity of what they had achieved. They had not only evaded capture but had turned the very tools of their enemies against them. Suddenly, a warning light flashed across the panel. One of the remaining Wrath officers had taken control of an isolated weapons system, an energy cannon mounted on the ship's underbelly. Though the majority of the ship's functions had been disabled or rerouted, this one system had remained untouched, its existence unknown to the children until now. The cannon began to power up, aiming directly at the Terran fleet. The girl at the communications console paled. "They're trying to fire on the fleet!" The realization hit them all at once. The Wrath, in a final act of defiance, were willing to sacrifice their own ship, and everyone on board, to inflict damage on the incoming human rescue force. The children had to act fast. If that weapon fired, it could devastate the fleet, and any hope of rescue would vanish in an instant. "Shut it down!" the boy shouted, his hands flying over the console as he searched for a way to cut power to the weapon. But the Wrath officer had isolated the system, making it impossible to access from their current controls. Panic began to creep into the group. After everything they had done, everything they had endured, were they really going to lose it all now? The youngest children looked to their older companions for reassurance, but even the older ones seemed at a loss. Then the boy's eyes narrowed. "We're not losing now," he muttered under his breath. His mind raced, recalling every piece of the ship's layout they had studied, every system they had manipulated. He knew there was one last option, but it was risky, dangerously so. "We can overload the main power core," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "It'll disable the weapon, but it'll also disable the whole ship. We'll be sitting ducks, completely powerless." Silence fell over the group as they processed the gravity of the decision. If they failed, the cannon would fire, and the Terran fleet could be destroyed. If they succeeded, they would disable the Wrath's final defense but leave themselves stranded in space, vulnerable to whatever might happen next. The girl at the console met his gaze, determination hardening in her eyes. "Do it!" Without another word, the boy initiated the power overload. The ship's lights flickered and dimmed as the core began to destabilize. In a matter of seconds, the once powerful Wrath warship was rendered utterly defenseless. The energy cannon, now powerless, ceased its deadly charge, and the threat to the Terran fleet was neutralized. But so too were the children's last remaining controls over the ship. The children could feel the ship drifting, no longer under any semblance of control. They had succeeded, but at a cost. Now, all they could do was wait. Minutes felt like hours as they floated in silence, their hearts pounding in their chests. Then, a crackle came through the comms, the static resolving into a voice that made the tension melt away. "This is Commander Harlan of the Terran Confederation. Stand by for boarding." Relief swept through the children as the Terran fleet finally made contact. They had done it, they had survived. And not only that, they had conquered their captors in the most unexpected way possible. Even as the warship was boarded by human operatives, the children remained calm, knowing they had earned their place among the victors. When the Terran soldiers finally entered the auxiliary bridge, they found the children waiting for them, weary but unbroken. The commander's eyes widened in disbelief as he took in the scene. The ship had been rendered helpless by a group of children. Earth's youngest had managed to outsmart one of the galaxy's most ruthless species. "Are you all right?" Commander Harlan asked, his voice tinged with amazement. The boy who had led the group nodded, stepping forward to speak for them all. "We're fine. We've got control of the ship, or at least we did." Harlan shook his head in disbelief, but a grin tugged at the corners of his mouth. "You did more than that, kid. You saved the fleet." Word of the children's triumph spread quickly. The Wrath, once proud and feared across the galaxy, had been humiliated, not by seasoned soldiers or elite operatives, but by a handful of human children. It was a blow that would resonate for generations, a lesson to any species that thought humanity, or its young, could ever be taken lightly. As the children were reunited with their families, the Wrath commander, now a prisoner himself, was forced to watch. He could no longer deny the Elder's warning, the words that had haunted him since the beginning of the children's rebellion. You captured human children? You are insane! In the aftermath, the story of the children's escape spread like wildfire across the galaxy, a tale of courage and defiance that would be told for years to come. The Vratha's reputation lay in ruins, and other species who had once considered humanity weak now reconsidered their stance. The children's victory wasn't just a rescue mission, it was a declaration of humanity's resilience, a message to the entire galaxy. Never again would humans be seen as mere prey for the stronger alien empires. Never again would anyone think of capturing a human, especially a human child, without considering the consequences. The children, though young, had proven the truth of humanity's strength. And in their victory, the galaxy learned a lesson it would never forget. As the Terran fleet returned home, the stars seemed just a little brighter. Humanity had faced its darkest hour and emerged not just victorious, but stronger than ever. The galaxy had been warned. Humanity's spirit, its courage, and its ability to rise above any challenge could not be broken.